Hello, and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show featuring Jason Zook. In uncertain times, we must change our focus and priorities. This show will highlight social justice issues with the goal of expanding minds and increasing unity, love, and mutual respect for ourselves and our planet. We support the Black Lives Matter movement. Our show aspires to promote social spirituality, which simply means that by coming together, we can solve any of our problems, including the goal of bringing an end to all forms of hate, discrimination, bias, or oppression. We must protect our environment, reform our criminal justice system, and protect every citizen from police brutality. When we come together, it becomes possible to bridge the gaps that plague our society and divide us from within. We the people means everyone.
Hello and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show. This is Jason Zook. It's a great pleasure I have the opportunity of presenting special guest Jonathan Dumas. Jonathan's the founder and co-owner of CommonCulture Coaching and Consulting. He brings his creativity and charisma in his coaching, consulting, and facilitation. Jonathan specializes in helping leaders eliminate the line between their work self and their personal self in order for them to fill their full authentic selves in both. He holds a Master's of Science in Organizational Psychology with a focus on diversity and leadership, and is passionate about empowering leaders to create equitable spaces for those around them. Over the last decade, Jonathan has coached and consulted leaders in higher education, nonprofit organizations, and for-profit organizations on creating sustainable and thriving cultures that encourage diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Jonathan also hosts a podcast called Real Time with Dumas Podcast, where he has meaningful and substantive conversations on society and culture. It's a great pleasure. I welcome Jonathan to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for agreeing to join us today for our interview. And I'll have to say, when I saw your information, I was just really happy about getting you on the show because of your industrial organizational background. I did psych for my undergrad, so I thought you'd have some amazing insights on these topics and on equality, diversity, and inclusivity in the workplace and in other places. So I appreciate you coming on to join us today.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun time. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Jonathan, when I look at our information, what we're doing, I know you're very passionate about social justice. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of your own background, what steps can employers take to create an equitable work environment in these uncertain times?
That's a really great question. And to be honest, that could be like 3 or 4 or 5 episodes of things that employers do. But one of the things let me just start from the beginning. I think when we think about what happened in 2020, we as a society, as a world, are focused on we were forced to focus on things that we were not privy to before. I think persons of color, in particular, Black folks, have been saying like things like police brutality, inequality in healthcare, inequality in education for years. But I think with the pandemic, us all being forced to reckon with all that stuff and being confronted with it, with the death and murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and successive order in a very short amount of time, I think we were all confronted with that. So I think with the outcry from everyday citizens, from everyday people across the world, I think that there was a response by organizations to, all right, we got to put a stand. We got to start doing something and doing the work. I think in my last organization I was a part of some diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts too, and doing some trainings. And a lot of times it was some of these folks, and I'll say white people, their first time reckoning with these things because they never just thought about it before. But I'm like, these are things that I experience all of the time. And so, that was the response. But fast forward a year later, you have organizations that still contributed to, in my opinion, and a lot of other opinions, a presidency with the last president of 45 who continue to instigate and talk about race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all these different things in a horrible manner. I honestly, no, Donald Trump is a racist. I'm not going to make words here. Yeah, he's a racist. And so you have these same organizations that put a black square out that had these statements out that said we need to do better. And then fast forward a year, they're not doing anything. And so one of the things that I'll say for organizations to really put their money where their mouth is is actually care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'll add one more, justice work in the workplace. It's going beyond just having more persons of color in the room, but it's also that deep intentional work in themselves, reading books, podcasts, not just asking their Black neighbor or Latinx, employees to literally do emotional labor and telling them what they are experiencing at work. But like, there are plenty of people, there are plenty of books, there's plenty of things out there that they can do. And so they have to, as leaders of organizations, as organizations in themselves, really commit to it. And the commitment piece is where a lot of organizations fall short. They recognize that it's more work than they're able to understand and do. And I'll finish with this, because I honestly could talk about this all the time, because this is what I do. But I think organizations believe that it's A plus B equals C kind of deal. Like, if I do this, then I do this, and I do this, and then we're done. And that's not what this work is. Any people work is a lifetime effort and a continuous repetition of like learning and unlearning of all kinds of things, breaking down white supremacy within themselves and around them. How are they doing the work? How are the efforts of the organization either furthering or hampering the experiences of marginalized groups and all the like?
Interesting, as you say. First initial follow-up question in my head was, how do you deal with the frustrating aspect of when people don't change? But more importantly than that, I wanted to share an anecdote of my own. I grew up in New Jersey, and where I grew up, it wasn't in front of my face. Like, I didn't see the oppression, the problems of our society unless you see it filtered through media, or unless you have someone who's close to you who encounters it when you're with them, or they tell you about it. And I'm 45, so it tells you my age. My mom taught in an inner city school in Paterson, New Jersey. So I grew up with perspective, but to see the degree of what we saw and the shock and horror of what George Floyd created in my mind, it gave me the ability to take off the lens I had originally etched into my head, and start looking critically at things. And I guess what I wanted to say to you as a follow-up is, that's what it took me to shift paradigms. Mm-hmm. I got disgusted. I went to 5 protests. That's all that was going on during that time frame last year here in Tampa. But I did several protests, peaceful protests. I got frustrated, and next thing you know, I meditated. And I'm like, what can I do? I'm just one person. And whatever I meditate and pray with said to me, you have a podcast. Expand your podcast to put programming on here so you can share messages. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're talking today, because of what happened last year, and because when I prayed, I got motivated. And I'm sure it's a process even for me. And I've always considered myself a moderate to liberal person growing up, because I said my mom taught in an inner city school. Trust me, that doesn't mean anything. Trust me.
No, I know.
I'm saying it as I say it, because I want to offer the perspective. Even my point of view isn't really, I'm not in the trenches very long doing any of this, and I don't really think I'm in the trenches. I think I'm just wanting to share viewpoints that I feel are critical and important. And since I have a podcast, why not make it important to share it, what you're passionate about? So that's why I'm here. I got there through my own process.
Yeah.
Follow-up question to you. How do we get 330 million people to go through their own individual processes based on where they start, where they've been, and who they've been? That's a complex scenario when you think about it, because someone living in like New York City is going to be a little more of a different viewpoint. And I'm not trying to generalize, but I'm just stating facts for our country, for example. When you go to someplace like, I don't mean to pick out a community, so I'll just say a state, where there's a less percentage of African Americans or people of color or diverse individuals. Let's just call it any place USA where it's a proportionate low percentage, if we'll leave it at that. How do you change those people's point of view? Because person over here and person over there, every single person has their own viewpoints. Yeah,
no, it is. Honestly, I ask myself this question all of the time, and my undergraduate degree was in history of political science. So I look at it not only from like an organizational psychologist standpoint, but also from a political science standpoint. Like, how do we do this? And we are in some of the most divisive times that we ever have been. And as I've examined history, as we look at it, even we haven't been this divisive since even like the Civil War, realistically. And so what we have to do is like change like the goal of these conversations, right? If the goal is to be like, I'm going to change every single heart and mind in the United States, in the world, we're going to be disappointed all of the time. And I think for me, that was when I first started doing this work and really getting heavily involved and invested in it. I think for me, that was my goal all of the time. It's like, I'm going to change every person, in particular, every white person I come in contact with. I'm going to change their mind. I'm going to win them over. Right.
Yeah. And I wish I could do that.
Yeah. It's not possible. And you could have the most agreeable, like you could have the most like make sense idea. Like it's a win-win, doesn't matter. Like it honestly doesn't matter with any subject. And so I think when we talk about changing hearts and minds, we have to do it and work with where folks are at. For me, I have more patience with somebody who admits and says, I know nothing. I'm going to ask a very ignorant question. I am so sorry. Than somebody who is at a place where they say, you know, like Facebook is so funny. I had gotten into a little Facebook scuffle, I'll say that, in February on Martin Luther King's birthday. And somebody who thought that he was further along just because he had Black friends, you know what I'm saying? And just like completely like rejected my telling him of like, you don't belong. You literally don't belong in this conversation about like Black folks, you white person don't belong here. Like I have more patience for the person who's completely ignorant and doesn't know anything compared to the person who is a white liberal and thinks that they're further along than the person who doesn't know. Like, for example, like the white farmer who lives in Montana or something like that, who's never come in contact or knows very few people of color than the person in like, I'm from like LA. So like that white person who lives in LA, who's been surrounded by people of color all their life. You know what I'm saying? I think we have to just curb our expectations of where people are at and understand and kind of get a sense of their experiences and just like share stories. Like you could argue facts and statistics all day, but like when you talk about stories and share what people are experiencing, that's very different. It can be very, very powerful. But there are some people where you share your stories and they just don't believe you. And those are people that I just don't mess with. I don't give my energy or time or emotional labor to those folks who are unwilling and reject consistent stories, facts, like truths about where people come from, the things that exist in our history, and that are just like irrefutable. You know what I'm saying? So, well, yeah, like kind of shotgun answer, but hopefully that answer.
You raised some valid points. Even with this whole George Floyd, everything that happened last year, I noticed in my own circles of people that I know from my own world, high school, college, whatever, that I noticed. I was like, why aren't you guys as alarmed by this as I am? Like, I would protest and they'd make comments like, aren't you? Not that they would say, should you be doing something else? But the reticence when I would talk to someone on the phone, I'm all passionate. I just went to a protest last year or whatever. And they were you could just tell they were more consumed about their lives because it doesn't affect them directly. It's not one of their family members. It's not one of their friends. It's not somebody that they're close with. And that created distance between me and people in my life for a while because I couldn't understand how like something like this doesn't raise your blood pressure, doesn't get you upset, doesn't want you to change things. Like it frustrated me. So I would ask you a question. How do you keep from being frustrated when you're around people that don't even get it on the slowest level, the lowest level, the smallest, slightest scale? Because that's something I've had to work through. Yeah, no. And even to go back to your point of like where people are just, the people that are unaffected or unimpacted or don't show any like signs of like caring are typically insulated by their own like privilege. And I know a lot of people get offended by that word, but like it really is. Privilege is like this kind of like insulation, you know, it is. And to not think about it is a privilege, right? To not be impacted by it is a privilege. And I recognize that, you know, I'm in an interracial marriage. There are people in my family that, you know, I've told stories to, I share stuff, they listen to my podcast. But to be quite honest, they're insulated by other white people. They're insulated by, you know, being in the suburbs. They're insulated by not having to worry or interact with folks that are like in a lower, and not even just like other white people that are in a lower socioeconomic status, but like are a low income bracket or other persons of color. So like, and that has to do with redlining and all that other stuff, you know, but anyways, so I have to like compartmentalize the work, honestly. Like in order for me not to be angry all of the time, what I have to do is I have to wait a minute.
Yeah.
If you're angry, guess what? Then you're an angry Black person, right?
Exactly.
Now we've got a stereotype they could try to throw.
Yeah.
I mean, I get so frustrated right now.
Well, the thing is like at this point, like I'll be angry, you know, like, and I don't know if I can cuss on the podcast, but like I'm a multifaceted human being. And like, for me to be sad, angry, happy, joyful, I'm going to express that in my full humanity. And sometimes that's shouting, sometimes that's crying, so whatever that is, and laughing really loudly with my friends and family in public spaces. Like, if you are uncomfortable or feel like I should be acting a different way, okay, we're in a public space or somewhere else. Like, you can vacate. Like, this is fine. For me, I moved into a space emotionally, mentally, where I am okay with being my full self. And I will be very honest about like the boundaries that I set for people that just don't get it. It's like, if I'm around somebody who doesn't understand, who doesn't get it, I'm not going to bring up those conversations, because like, it is pointless. Like, it really is pointless, because like, what I have to do to get you to understand where I'm coming from is I have to give you a history lesson. I have to unpack my own story, because like, I am a statistical person, like grew up in poverty, homeless, drugs were in my family, alcohol abuse in my family, all this stuff growing up. And so I have to unpack that for you. Then I have to break down within those stories. I have to break down the stats, why this happened. And then after bring in like the governmental, like lapses here, historically, you see, even me explaining it, it's exhausting, right?
Well, you know what? I was just thinking of this. As you were just talking about that, I'm thinking people are in government, people are in organizations, people are in institutions. Mm-hmm. All those things are made up of individuals. Yeah. So like you said earlier, for us to try to change minds and let's use the flowery words, change minds and hearts.
Yeah.
It's a lot more of an undertaking that we're talking about from 500 years of oppression. Yeah. And that's been my lesson in doing interviews with people like yourself and others who are on my show is we got to go against 500 years of indoctrinated repression.
Whitewash history, all the stuff. And it's very purposeful. Reality. Yeah,
it's reality. Exactly. So it's a bigger challenge. I mean, when you think about the Constitution, ingrained in the Constitution, you have the 3/5 compromise. Mm-hmm. Yep. Ingrained in, I did poli sci in undergrad too. Ingrained in the Constitution is literally our revered document has inequities in it. Yeah. And it's like, I get speechless because I get caught up a little. I get stuff myself. And I'll probably turn red before we're done. But my point is this. I would love to say role models help. Mm-hmm. I love what athletics are doing right now with their but they're not doing it completely, because if you peer below the onion on professional sports, you have systems of oppression in there. Yeah. You have systems of oppression in medicine. You have it in real estate. You've got it in financial institutions. It's ingrained on every single aspect of our entire reality. Mm-hmm. And to really come out of that, it's like taking the right pill and coming out of the pod and looking around going, oh my God, what's hooked up to me right now? Because I didn't realize any of this is what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there was a lot of folks that I like to be very specific, because like using coded or shadowed language isn't really helpful. So like a lot of white people that I've like come in contact with recently, they'll show a lot of those things of like, man, I can't believe this has happened. I'm so pissed off. And I'm like, yeah, I'm mad too. And but also I've been dealing with this for like 30 years. You know what I'm saying? Like I have learned to do that. And so, but my call to them is like, what are you going to do with that anger? Right? Because like, there's actually only so much I can do as a Black person in white spaces. But you in those white spaces, what are you going to do about that, with that anger, with that frustration? How are you going to strategically align yourself? How are you going to strategically like do the work in your organization, in your life, friends, families? And a lot of times, here's the thing too. A lot of times people think it's like, we need to get this mass movement, like parade the streets, yada, yada, yada. And yes, that's a part of it. But the other part of it is actually the day-to-day conversations that happen, the interactions that you have every single day. What are the conversations like? How are you navigating those difficult conversations? And also the thing that I get to is like, I just don't know how to have them. Well, you have them by having them. Like you learn how to have them by having them and learn that. And I think I didn't get to this point of where I am just willy-nilly. I listen to a ton of podcasts, doing my research, read books from a wide variety of different voices, not just like other Black folks or Latinx folks or Asian folks or indigenous voices, but also of like, women of like the LGBTQ plus community, all of these different voices that can lend to your learning and unlearning of things. You have to remain open, but also willing
to do and have those conversations, right? And those are the biggest pieces. And it's so hard. It's easier said than done. It is so hard, especially with friends and family.
Before George Floyd happened, I kind of was like, oh, I was raised, don't talk politics, don't talk religion, don't talk this, don't talk that. And I always worked within those parameters. And then after what happened last year, I'm like, that's off the table. Like, if someone doesn't like what I have to say because of my podcast or what I say in person, then they can go somewhere else. I don't care. Anyone in my life who feels that I'm outspoken and they're not agreeing with my views, okay, go to your other podcasts. Or, I've lost some friends. I'm not worried about it. I have plenty. I don't worry about the ones that don't want to hear what I have to say. I'd rather care about the ones who actually take what I have to say and work on moving and changing things. Yeah. It's the action steps we talk about. How can we change things? Like, what do you think of that? Like, if you look at the challenges we're up against and where we are on August of 2021, what do we need to do to move the mark? How do you, I know what you'll likely say, but I'd still be curious to hear what you have to from your experiences.
Okay, so it's a lot. There's a lot that I could say. I think to break it down, like even from like a micro standpoint, one of the first things I would say, if you're an individual listening to this podcast, you're like, all right, I agree with everything you're saying, but I don't know what to do next. All right, well, what I would say is like, if you hear an insensitive thing that is happening in your circles, if you hear something like that, address it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's differences calling in, calling out. Like I would imagine, like, if it's a very intense thing or somebody says something extremely like homophobic, sexist, racist, or whatever, call that thing out in that moment, because that shouldn't be tolerated in your friends groups or whatever. But also, like, there's moments where you can be like, yo, can I talk to you about something you just said? Like, that was actually pretty offensive for this reason, or this didn't sit well with me. And your likely response you'll get is like, it's a joke, or like, you're not gay, why would that bother you? Or you're not black, why would that bother you? Blah, blah, blah. But it's like, those are the things you can immediately do. That's the first step of like building up. Like, listen to all kinds of voices. Take the cue from people that like are doing this work. And I would encourage specifically, take the cue from persons of color that are willing to do this work. There's plenty of podcasts. I can give you literally a list of like go-to stuff. Me and my partner, we do this work together. And so she put together this long list of like initial steps that you could take of things that you can learn. Yeah. So I can give that to you. And if anybody who wants it, reach out to me, and I think you said you're going to put my information in the show notes, but that's initially. I think it's the commitment to the work is what you could do. And the sooner that we can commit to this work, the sooner that we can commit to changing the injustices that we see, both in like in all of the things, is like, that's like the first step that we can do. There's no simple answer. Like it's a very simple question, but there's no simple answer.
No, you're right.
And we have to be committed to doing the work, from the, micro steps of like engaging in those wrong and hurtful and bad comments to like on an organizational level. Like there was one time I just asked the question, I used to work in HR, and I said, hey, like, why do we use these classifications for race? Like, these aren't right. And like, literally that started a week and a half long, like thing of like, why we're using these race classifications. Because all you ask that simple question, and oftentimes it will unearth.
Why wasn't it thought of before you though, right? Like
exactly.
Complex institutions. Why wasn't this figured out? And the answer is like
HR.
It's probably going to be, well, we didn't think of it. No, you didn't really. You really didn't think of it.
Yeah. Those are the things you can ask questions, remain curious, be committed. That's what I would say. Be courageous is also what I would say. And I'll say this too, because I've also gotten this. For white people who are doing this, don't expect a cookie for doing this work. There is no, just because you like call out somebody doesn't mean you're going to get an automatic high five from your black friend or your Latinx coworker or your trans friend or anything like that. Like, you do this because you care for the dignity and respect of people, and you want them to be able to live their lives fully and authentically without any impact or unrightful impact from the outside world. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. Yeah.
I couldn't have said it better than you did. I'm being honest. I mean, I'm not trained in what you're trained in, but hearing what you're saying right now, I couldn't have done that so artfully. I appreciate it. How about this one? Like, from my involvement doing social justice stuff, just for my show and little things I've done, I noticed a reluctance on the part of some in society to even grasp the issues that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I get frustrated myself, and I'm just going to tell you, I get frustrated when I'm around people who act like there's no social justice problems going on right now.
Yeah.
For me, I get frustrated if you can't tell by the way I'm describing it. But I guess going back to your original point, I guess, how do you deal with those that aren't even aware of it? Not that they're not wanting to be aware of it, but they're just so, I don't know if it's self-absorbed. I don't know if they're the deep end of the privilege pool and it's over their heads and they can't see out of it to see the air for what reality is, or if it's just that they just don't make it a priority for other reasons in their lives.
Yeah, it's probably, honestly, Jason, it's probably all of those. Like, honestly, it's probably all of those. Like, I remember I was speaking on this panel one time and we were talking about power. And so we kept using this power, and this guy raises this, he was an older white man. And I'm saying these experiences because like, this has been my experience within the DEI justice space of like, I've just like the major pushback that I've gotten is predominantly from white people. It's predominantly from older white men. And I don't have anything against white people. It's just like when I talk about this stuff and I'm speaking honestly and from my perspective and my story, these are the pushback that I get. So I'm not attacking any white people. This is just truth from how I've experienced it. And so as we're talking about power, he raises his hand. He's like, I don't understand. He was angry. I don't understand why we're talking about power in such a negative sense. And I'm sitting at the table with this gentleman. This is like, yeah, I feel like we're just, doing whatever. And like, there's coded language about like the power, because we were talking about race and like high income to low income, all these different. And so I engaged with him at the table because I'm one of the people that's speaking on the panel. And I just said, power be used in the right way and the wrong way. And, and it was like a faith institution. And so we're in their building because I guess he attended this like religious institution. And so I was just there and I said, like power, authority, money was able to like build this building. And it's like a really nice building, a compound, right? And like, that's the good use of power. But as I even shared earlier, there is a bad use of power. And as we've seen over the course of history, even in the stories of my own personal story, where power is used to just like literally keep my family from not only like getting out of poverty or getting out of this cycle of like oppression and suppression, right? And so like when I told him that, he was like, oh, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't think about it that way. Like I never really talked to anybody from your perspective. And I'm like, yeah. And like, I totally
light bulb went off in that.
Yeah. And like he like, because of my tone and response to him, and this is another segue of like, for me to have that conversation with him as a Black person talking to this older white man, I had to literally monitor how I was talking to him in order for him to even receive. I had to be in a posture for him to, the correct posture for him to even receive it, which is a privilege and a whole nother thing. But anyways, like I couldn't have responded just as angry. He wouldn't have gotten any of that. But that's just psychology, right? That's not anything.
Well, you know what, though? That's a great point you raised, because you're also a human being in your heart, right? And you're a human being in your experience. Mm-hmm. And I will say this, and I'm going to be blunt about this. As a white person walking around the streets of Tampa, for example, or any street, depending on where you're at, there are certain things that I don't have to worry about that you do, that you go through your daily experiences encountering every day, that I have only started looking at and thinking, oh my God, myself. And I'm being honest with everything between law enforcement and the way that you're perceived in a store to walking down the street at the night wearing a hoodie. I mean, there's just so many things that if you look at it, I could see if you're an African-American parent trying to talk to your kids to stay safe in America, it's going to be a damn big book and a lot of asterisks, underlined, highlight, and you're gonna. It's a manual. Like just stay alive on the streets in America. If you have a person of color, good luck. It's like
it's a lot.
I mean, and I'm saying that because from my vantage point, I always was thinking to myself, like, I'm living in a free and amazing society. And I do think there are aspects of our country that are free and amazing, but it's not for all. Not everybody's free right now. And you can't say that looking at it critically even, and from a valid point of view, everybody's got to look and see that there are systemic issues that we have to cure. I mean, on the surface, the name of a street, very important. A team, very important. You got to switch up those jerseys and make sure people understand they're being accurate in how they look at things. But more importantly than that, under the surface, all these reforms that are needed to economically help people, help people with healthcare, help people with their housing, help them with education. These are real challenges that our government should be involved in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's the fox in the hen house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing is what's really interesting, and I say this a lot on my podcast when I talk about these things, it's like white supremacy harms all of us. White person included. Like diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work doesn't just involve persons of color, doesn't just involve minority communities and like whether it's like sex, gender, all those things. Like it involves absolutely all of us. And it takes all of us to make changes in our society. And I reference this too, that Martin Luther King was not killed because like he was fighting for Black rights. Like that's not why Martin Luther King was killed. Martin Luther King was killed because like he started to galvanize a rainbow coalition of people of all ethnicities, all backgrounds, all cultures in the United States, whether they were rich, poor, and all that stuff, and said, we need to change the way that society is functioning for all of us. We need to create a living wage for everybody to live. We need to get better education, get better healthcare for absolutely all of us. And a lot of these things, a lot of these reforms and laws and legislations that are in there would actually not just help Black people, but that's what these like ultra right wing people will say. It's like, oh, Black people just want this, or Latinx people want this, or the LGBTQ plus community wants this. Like they're just trying to change it. No, we want these things because we know it's going to help absolutely everybody, not just the marginalized community. It actually uplifts everybody in society and does this. And so, but the thing about white supremacy is it tricks us and pins us up against each other, like we're fighting each other. And the way I like to approach things when I have these conversations, especially when somebody who's on the other side of it, like if you're willing to have an actual dialogue, if you're willing to actually engage with this and take this seriously, then I will talk to you. No matter how frustrating and emotionally exhausting it is, I will talk to you. But we both have to take each other's stories and experiences seriously in order for us to reach a compromise. And I think that is the biggest frustration that we're seeing in government right now, is that like people, even that have been in government for 30, 40 years, 20 years ago, they would try to actually work with the other side and come to a compromise. We are not seeing that now. Things that make complete and utter sense for our country with these reforms and everything like that, they refuse to do it because they care about their job and keeping a position of power and authority more than they care about caring for the people that they're supposed to be representing, because the people that they represent believe that this is the right thing to do, which is when they know for a fact that it would actually work out better for them. Like it literally would work out better for them in the long run. So it's incredibly frustrating to see these things now. But even to get back to your original question of like, wait, you had a question. I actually had a point to it. You had your question. Initial question.
I think I was talking about if they don't even acknowledge it as an issue. It's not even something that they're looking at because they're so self-absorbed, or they're in their deep pool of privilege, or they're just not really registering it right now. For them, they may say, "Well, I have Black friends.
Yeah.
I know people who are Black. Yeah. I used to watch Cosby in the 80s. I mean, sure, I'm glad you did, but guess what? It's 2021. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I don't waste my time and energy because like at that point it's like, oh, you don't believe that this is real. Like you don't believe that this exists. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. That's fine.
Here's the question I want to know is I'm afraid to find this out. I hope we never find this out. What's the number and proportions of people that are like that kind of person who's totally tuned out and has zero interest in because they're so self-absorbed, or they may have their own viewpoints on race relations, or they may just say that they want to stay in their little segment of society. That's it. Like, I'm hoping that our democracy itself has more people that can think openly for themselves, not to be contaminated by bigotry and just what I call stupidity, ignorance. And I hope there's enough in our society that to withstand that kind of thing as a force, because this past election, obviously, regardless of who voted for who, but you see the kind of outcomes that we could have. Elections have outcomes. And I was happy that one outcome didn't happen, but it doesn't mean that another wave of that can't happen in the future.
Yeah.
And while you're doing what you're doing every day, it's like larger as a society, we have to come to grips with our past, with our history, with the way that we teach others. And I think this is my segue into asking about critical race theory, because I can't even believe that that's just even a big topic of discussion when we're looking at a society that has multiple strains of things that we should look at from different points of view. And so I want to ask you about critical race theory, and why do you think it's such a hot button topic for people who don't acknowledge it and are I feel like they're fearful of it?
Yeah, it's just a tactic, like it's a political tactic because nobody was worried. It's been around since the 70s. It's not they don't use it in education or in elementary schools, high schools, middle schools like that. They don't even teach critical race theory. They don't do it. It's a law theory that examines legislation and sees the impact of race. If like law has an impact on society, or this legislation has taking in all kinds of like race, ethnicity, all these things, and sees if that law is like, impacting positively or negatively on society. Like that's what it is. It's used in law school. Yeah.
The boogeyman, proverbial boogeyman right now.
Yeah.
For people who are trying to go against whatever they're trying to go against right now. I'm like,
yeah.
I scratch my head when I turn on the TV, and I don't flip on Fox News much. I kind of go through it, past it, or around it.
Yeah.
Sometimes my remote gets stuck, and I gotta move on. It's just something that perplexes me, and I just look forward to like the future where these issues aren't so divided.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part, right? It's like, and I'm just gonna bash like politicians at this point. It's like politicians will say these hot button tickets, and it doesn't matter on what other side, like Democrat, Republican, ultra right wing, ultra left wing. It doesn't matter.
Well, you know what? I have to correct you on one thing with that point. The Republicans have not been doing enough for race relations. They have not been doing enough for any of these issues.
Oh no, they don't. They
Trump,
don't.
Right?
No,
they
don't.
I'm just going to say that. I didn't interrupt you, but
No. Yeah, no, that's very fair. But to my point, it's like they will use hot button topics or like extrapolate something that will like galvanize a large amount of folks to get what they want, and that is to stay in power, to keep their seats. Because ultimately, and I mean, how often have we seen like whether it's a Democrat or Republican flip on what they said they were going to do, or change their mind, or like, oh, I didn't say this, I said this, or whatever, just using wordplay. And it's incredibly frustrating. That's what's incredibly frustrating about American politics, that they care about their position that they hold more than they care about the people that they represent. And I will say this, there are a few Republicans and it feels weird to say it, a few Republicans and some Democrats that truly care about their constituents and will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are represented well and that they get what they need for the constituents. But that's sadly, I would say it's like 1%, less than 1% of the people that we have representing us in Congress ultimately. And so it sounds like I'm being like really pessimistic or like not having a positive outlook on this, but like, that's just the reality. Like, honestly, that's just the reality of what we're experiencing right now, especially as divisive as our politics are today. And so they use like in this example, Republicans are using critical race theory, or Fox News or whoever on that side is using critical race theory and saying like, oh, they want to teach us this stuff and teach that white people are bad. No. And just because you have white skin doesn't mean you're inherently racist or a bad person. It's like there is a system that's been in place long before you were even alive, a thought, or like my mom used to say, you are a twinkle in my eye, but long before you were a twinkle in your parents' eye, that were instituted and you are benefiting from today. But it is all of our responsibility, but the burden should lie furthermore on white folks to fix these issues. And so again, the greater question is, how can we recognize and extrapolate what is true, what is not? Going back to what I said earlier, being courageous, being curious, being humble, and constantly being willing to do the work to make sure that we're not getting fooled by what these people in power and authority want us to do. And that's to stay divided.
That's what we have to do, is come together. And that's the biggest, I guess, challenge for us. When you are actually looking at the workplace and places you've been, how do you see racism's impact, systemic racism's impact, play out in the workplace?
Ooh, that's a hard question to answer. It's so systemic. We have to think of systemic racism as water. Like, and some of y'all may have heard this analogy before, but like, we are fish and we're in water, and systemic racism is that water. And so we are just swimming along. We don't recognize that it's there. And so how we see systemic racism play out in organizations, it can be anywhere from like having norms of dress and attire and how your hair is done, or even like how like somebody acts or behaves. Like, so for example, this is something I've seen. I witnessed this when I was in HR. This was the head of HR for the company I used to work at, said this. She said, if somebody has a name I can't pronounce, I'm not going to interview them. That's what she said. She said that. The head of HR for this company I worked at said those words. And that was that is the most, wow. Like, and that's kind of like how like systemic racism will play out. You have people in power that continue to perpetuate, and she wouldn't say that that's racist. She wouldn't say that that's like xenophobic or any of those things. She would just say like, if I can't pronounce the name, I'm not going to interview them. But you are literally like narrowing it down to what is familiar to you. And this was a white woman. So what is familiar to you is names like Steve or Stan or Timothy or something like that. But even still, it's like it could not even just be that. It's like there are other really complicated names. Schwarzenegger is a really complicated name, but white folks can pronounce that.
He's elected governor. I mean,
yes, white folks will say things like that, but typically the people that are impacted are racial or ethnic marginalized communities. Minority communities are typically impacted. So systemic racism is the system that has strategically been put into place that indirectly or directly impacts marginalized communities, specifically that has to do with race.
You know, it's interesting because even as I'm starting the last year being more aware of these things, and then something called Sundown Towns. Have you heard of those?
Mm-hmm.
I was
yes,
shocked.
I'm very aware. Yeah.
I was shocked that there still are sundown towns in the country.
Yep.
Yeah. Can you explain to our audience? Because my understanding of sundown towns, my research of it, is that there are certain communities that have these unofficial rules that if you're of a minority or a person of color, that you can't go out of your house at certain hours of the day. Like at night, they make it so you can't go into certain towns across communities, across the country in rural areas, and that you could literally be harassed by law enforcement or owners of shops if you go into these these designated areas where you're not allowed. And I was like, my mouth dropped. I couldn't. Yeah. It's shocking.
Yeah. You have the general
during my lifetime, the last 10 years.
No,
like
it's I mean, they're still very, very prevalent. It's basically, you said it's like unspoken rules of like, if you're outside or still out and about after a certain amount after, sundown, then like, you do have risk of being harassed or messed with, or, something dangerous, something bad could happen to you if you're not home by streetlights. And the thing is, like, that was always the rule for me and I grew up in San Diego. So it's not like, but me and my family, it's like we all growing up, for kids in my family, we had to be home before the streetlights came on, because like they want to know where we're at. My family wanted to know where we're at, if we're going to be safe, all that stuff. And so these are like, again, the things that we experience, and probably there's other people that have the same kind of rule, but like the reasoning behind that rule for kids in my family was because like, we don't know what's going to happen to us after a certain amount of time. And now I didn't live in a sundown town. Like I'm not going to say that, like, that's not my story.
Mindset of it, the paradigm of a sunset town. It resides in people's brains. So when they go from a sunset town to one that's not a sunset town, you could see where people are like, there's issue. And I can't believe that there's governments that allow that. I mean, it's in our democracy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's unspoken rules, right? These are the norms and cultural norms, or I'll use lowercase s, societal norms, like whether within that town, that have been established over long periods of time. And again, like that's the sundown town mindset. Like that's not my story. That's not my family's story.
I just wanted to bring that up because we were talking.
Absolutely. But I recognize like those things still exist, and remnants of that within society peppered out. Doesn't matter where you're at, big city, small city, whatever, still exists. Yeah. To this day. Yeah. That we're still experiencing.
I'll ask you this one. Why are difficult conversations necessary?
Ooh, yeah. I was just telling my partner this the other day, is that like difficult conversations are like crucial. Like conflict is crucial to having a healthy relationship. And people will be like, why is conflict? What is that? But like healthy conflict, like conflict that is done well, that like you're putting your point across, and like the other person's not really receiving it, but like they're listening, they're in the thick of it with you. On the other side of that is like a closer knit, like like that. It just, you understand, like you get like where that person is coming from. You're fighting with them, but like you're fighting with them, not like against them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so I think
you're not offending somebody by talking to them with a different point of view.
Yeah. And like, you're just, the thing is like, I'm not calling you out your name. I'm not like saying you're stupid or dumb or like what you believe is dumb. I'm honestly treating your perspective, your experience with honesty and truth. And I'm treating it as sacred, honoring it. But also this is where I'm coming from that. And like, I gotta be honest, the most beautiful like disagreements that I've had that have we didn't necessarily come to a resolution or this person agreed with me at the end of the day, but we were still cool. You know what I'm saying? Like it really is a game changer to engage with somebody and have a difficult conversation, because it truly is important. And to actually answer your question, I think difficult conversations are important to have, because if we go around navigating this world and just like being a yes person or like avoiding, like we are perpetuating unhealth. We are not really understanding each other. We're not really getting each other. We're not really on each other's side. We're just fake. It's fake. It's hollow. It's not real. And it's inauthentic to think that like we're not, it's inauthentic to think that we are in a place that we can 100% agree with somebody or where they're coming from. And so even with like me and my partner disagree, like we do not agree on everything, but like, I think we are intentional about how we have conflict. I'm intentional about how I even have conflict with my mom. My mom, it's funny because my mom has said, like, she has said, sometimes I have put boundaries about like how she talks to me or stuff that she says to me that like, I know that's just not healthy for me anymore, especially being an adult. And so she has said, Jonathan, I don't like hearing what you shared with me, but I appreciate the way that you shared that with me and the fact that you said it. And like creating those boundaries and like being uncomfortable in that time has like done wonders for my relationship with my mom, has done wonders with the relationship with my partner, with my friends, because they know where I'm coming from and they know that I'm not being mean or aggressive or anything like that to them. I want them to know where I'm coming from and I want to know where they're coming from. So again, being curious, being honest, being courageous. And Brene Brown says it's 8 seconds of uncomfortable, 8 seconds of the uncomfortable. And then after that, you're just in the thick of it and having those difficult conversations.
A real talk. And I think
yes, absolutely.
An important part of what you're talking about fits within what I always say all the time is expanding minds and changing viewpoints, right? You're going to change the view by having the conversation, because how else are they going to learn if they stay in their respective corner? You'll never have anyone change.
Yeah.
Segmented society forever. We got to take those lines and blur them and make it everybody has freedom and opportunities and you don't have restrictions and all those kind of things.
Absolutely. And that goes back to something that you said earlier. It's like, oh, you were raised not to like talk about difficult things like politics or, race or anything like that. Well, again, like that is a privilege not to talk about those things, because like for me, we always talk about race, always talk about like politics, because like it's so ingrained, like being Black in America is political, I say, because it's just like, you can't avoid it. You can't escape it. It's like, this is something that I constantly live with. And like, whether people believe it or not, like laws and legislation impact us on a daily basis. And so like, we're constantly talking about like the things that are happening in society. And so like, for me, I've always wondered, like, why not? Like, why not talk about it? Like I went to a predominantly white institution and like, they would kind of avoid these difficult, hard conversations. I'd be like, so we're just going to pretend like these things don't exist. Like, we're just going to pretend like, you give a half-ass sorry about saying something, mean or hurtful. And we're just not going to like, and then you say that I'm sensitive, but like, actually, like I'm the only Black person in this room and y'all just want to, use the N-word or say things are ghetto when it's just like,
Have you experienced that in the workplace before?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I've worked in predominantly white space, not being called the N-word at work. No. Hell no. But I've definitely experienced other things. So it's just like, no, like I want to talk about this. Like we need to talk about this. And like, I've just gotten good. And that's how my podcast, like, that's why I have my podcast to just like, let's like talk about it. Like, why not?
I'm going to share this with you, how amazing these conversations go and how fast it goes. We're already running low on time. I want you to share with our audience more about your podcast, share with our audience where they can find you, and also anything else that, our audience can know about. I'd love to like have that in the show notes, but I want to make sure we're talking because this is a great conversation for me. And I learned from having you on and anyone else that's on the show. And I just am so grateful that you chose to come to our show today and talk about this stuff because of how important it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me on. This has been a blast. I mean, again, I can talk for days about this. I told you that, but
it's interesting that we can have fun talking about these issues. Like,
yeah.
You're a great person to have a dialogue with. You're teaching me certain things from different points of view and perspectives. I think my audience really, appreciates the fact that we can have these talks and just be real about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm the founder and owner of CommonCulture Coaching and Consulting, where I am an organizational psychologist and coach. So I work with companies on these DEI efforts and I do organizational development through a DEI lens. And then I work one-on-one with coaches on like diversity and just empowering them to understand that they can be their full selves in their job and their work and in their life. Also the host of Real Talk with Dumas Podcast, where I have real conversations with the people I see every day because we don't know what we miss until we miss them. And so I just have conversations with my friends, family, and anybody else that will sit down with me to have real and authentic and substantive conversations about society, politics, pop culture, all those things. And I drop an episode every other week. So you can find me on you can just email me if you have any questions or want to work with me at jonathan@commonculturecc.com. You can also check out my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called Real Talk with Dumas. That is D as in dog, UMAS as in Sam podcast, Apple, Spotify, all those places. And then you can hit me up on LinkedIn, Jonathan L. Dumas. That's another place that I check quite frequently. I am working on my website that's getting updated. So hopefully that'll be ready in the next month or so. But yeah, those are all the places I frequent and am available.
I have to say this. I mean, having our conversation today it's been very impactful in a positive way for me. I really enjoy the ability of you being able to explain some of these concepts I think other people may not always grasp or comprehend or even try to entertain. In my opinion, if we can get people through this episode to start thinking of these issues, and it's a small win for us, but it's a critical step. And so that's how I look at these things is looking at if we were in a marathon at 26.2 miles and each step represents 1 inch towards our end result, we're probably at mile 5 right now since the beginning of time. So we have a lot of steps to take, but as long as we take them together, we can change people, right? And change perspectives. So that's how I'm looking at this.
Absolutely. Take the time. It's hard work. I know some of the concepts I was sharing might offend some folks, and I encourage folks to investigate why you're offended, what I said was offensive, why you feel that like pull in your gut, and just like interrogate that. What is that thing? What is that feeling? Because I listen to stuff all the time. I purposely listen to things that make me uncomfortable, because what is on the other side of that comfortability? Am I uncomfortable because this person is saying wrong things? Am I uncomfortable because like I'm just not used to it? Like, what is it? And then like trying to figure that out. So this was so fun. I really appreciate you for having me on. I really love having conversations like this and having an opportunity to share my story, share expertise, and teach some folks some new stuff that they haven't heard before.
I'm going to share an aside for a minute. About a year ago, after I decided I wanted to expand my podcast, right? So I had a new intro that I did, and it sounded really cool at the time. Trying to find guests to come on and talk about this stuff last year. I don't know if it was just me or if I just wasn't connected the right way. I would email people. I'd never get a response. I'm like, hey, come on this psychic show. And I guess that's what they're thinking. This is a psychic show. Why would I want to talk to this guy about race relations if he's talking about hocus pocus in the future you will see? Mm-hmm. So it took a year or so to start getting quality, amazing, incredible guests like you on the show. But I'm so grateful. If it's, I would wait as long as I needed to, but I'm so grateful that I could have you on here, and I'd love to have you back. I know there's a lot we could talk about that we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of these issues and the complexity of them and where we can dwell and go with them. We were talking before the show about just looking at simple topics, and we could go 15 hours on one area. If we were to say, how can we change racism in America? I could start talking right now, and you could live your entire lifetime and come back and we'd still be talking. Because it takes a lot to change things. I'll say this. If you were a spirit animal, which spirit animal would you be and why? And if you want, I can go first.
Let's see. You go first. I'm gonna
have a prop. I always say every episode I'd be an owl.
Okay.
Look at that. I can't even do it. I would last a minute on HSN. So my spirit animal is an owl. I have 2 parrots. I'm all about birds. I grew up with a parrot as a little kid. Owl's about wisdom and knowledge and looking above the fray. And I feel like my intuitive abilities give me that. So that's why I say that.
Yeah. Well, I love cheetahs. Cheetahs are my favorite animal. So I usually, the way that the fact that they can run 75 miles per hour on land is incredible to me, but their bodies like overheat. So the importance of rest is so necessary. And I feel like it's reflective of like even my own life, where I can go really, really fast for short bursts of time, but my rest and my mental health and emotional health are incredibly important to me. And I hold that space sacred in order for me to survive. Right. But they also they're really I just found this out, but the zoos will have started, or nature preserves have started to partner them up with support dogs, because they are so anxious, because there's so many things actually out in the wild that impact their normal day to day. So they're this gene of anxiety and stress is on them. So to calm them, it's wild. So they'll pair a puppy up with a cheetah and they'll grow up together. And so they'll be friends. And then that kind of helps calm them and soothe them, because they learn the behavior and connection points from the dog. And then they'll mate to have other cheetahs, because it's just they're so anxious. So I have my partner, she's my support system, and really is an incredible person to lean on when I'm super stressed and anxious and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of, my community is incredibly important to me to keep me healthy.
A couple of parts from that answer that are pretty amazing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Super fun.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank Jonathan for coming on the show today and sharing his insight. His company's called CommonCulture Coaching and Consulting. It's difficult when we as a society have to have some complex conversations, but like we showed today, you can have an amazing conversation. You can have a great time doing it, and you could do it in a way that hopefully can elevate each and every one of us. And when you're talking about someone who has a master's of science in organizational psychology with a focus on diversity and leadership, that's for me, a dream list of a guest to come on the show. Because I wanted to have somebody who could come in and talk about these topics. And I've been blessed recently to get a couple of different people sharing their viewpoints on diversity, inclusivity. And it's something that I think is so important for us. We need more people like Jonathan out there. I think we need an army of them, because you're not going to change society without doing it on an individual basis. And in order to do that and live your own authentic self year round, it's going to take some work and effort on all our parts. And I challenge every member of the audience listening to this episode today, just like any other episode that deals with social justice issues, keep an open mind. Don't get frustrated. Don't give up, because this is a long haul. This isn't something we're going to do in one day or 1 minute or 1 year. It's going to take a while. But the good news is there's enough people who share the passion for change, who share the ideals of helping society overall to overcome these barriers that have been in place for 500 plus years, that we can truly make a difference. So keep that in mind. Listen to this episode. If you have any questions, reach out to Jonathan. His information will be in the show notes. And if you have any questions about my show or my program, you can reach out to me at info@D, socialpsychicradio.com. And I appreciate each of my guests presenting their viewpoints on this show, because that's one of the most critical parts of running a podcast, is being able to share points of view that might not always be comfortable to everyone in the audience, but at least it's going to be something, in my opinion, that can maybe cause you to think about things from a different point of view. If we can do that with these episodes, then you're going to see me with a smile on my face for years to come. So thank you so much for tuning in. Stay positive, because when you're positive, anything's possible. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Social Psychic Radio Show. Don't forget to join us for another episode next time. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes. You can also check us out on Facebook, and don't forget to visit the Social Psychic YouTube channel. Until next time, it's a big world out there. Keep an open mind, embrace your paradigms, and know that the universe is always yours to explore.